I don't know, maybe we should extend our church service, make them an hour and a half and take a whole 15 minutes in the middle just to have fun and talk and everything. Because some of you don't come early, and then some of you scoot out right afterwards. If we did it in the middle, we'd have a lot of time to talk and fellowship and just be great. But at any rate, fellowship is an important thing, and love, and we're going to talk a little about love today because Valentines Day comes on Friday, but I mean, it's a thing where you talk and you have to have a conversation and that kind of stuff, and so that's really important. There was this son who asked his father, Dad, how much does it cost to get married? Father thought for a while and looked back at the son and said, well, son, he says, I don't know. I'm still paying for it. I always like Charlie Brown. For some reason, I always feel like I can relate to Charlie Brown. He's always, that's me, always in that kind of situation, it seems like. But you all know Lucy, Lucy's always beating up on him and always having problems. And so one day, Charlie Brown tells Lucy, you just need more love. She says, I have enough love. I love the whole world. It's just people I just can't stand. And that's the way it goes sometimes, isn't it? We preached through 1 Corinthians, if you remember, went through the whole book, and we did chapter 13, but chapter 13 really is in the middle of chapter 12 through 14, talking about spiritual gifts in the church. And so we talked about it in that context, but today I'd like to go back to 1 Corinthians 13 and pull out just that middle section that talks about love. Sometimes 1 Corinthians 13 is called the love chapter. And if you go to a wedding, probably 8 chances out of 10 you're going to hear 1 Corinthians 13 someplace talked about, and the love. And so we're going to concentrate on that because the love section there is really talking about relationships in the church, but it is perfect for the relationships in a family. It's perfect for the relationships maybe for a child to parents. It's perfect for relationships between siblings. Pastor Scott and I, he's certainly many more than I, have been involved in numerous funerals in which it's amazing sometimes. You go to this family and here's 2 kids that can't talk or a family that's just broken apart and they can't talk to each other, they hate each other, and you're thinking, man, where's the love in this family? What's the matter? And just some families are like that. And there's just no love there. And so this morning, we're going to talk about love a little bit from this particular section. What is it? And I hope you'll evaluate your own life, but you may evaluate your life in a number of different contexts. If you're married, you can evaluate in your marriage relationship. If you are part of the church, which you're here this morning, so you're part of the church, it may be your relationship with other people in the church, because certainly love is challenged sometimes in the church, and that's what this whole passage talks about. Maybe you can, if you're not married, and maybe you can apply it to siblings that you have. Maybe you can compare it to parents. Sometimes things go on, but there's a lot of different relationships in our family that deal with love. And so today we're going to look at just straight up, and I don't have any fancy outline. I've got basically one slide on the PowerPoint here to help you through on your little text there that we have in your bulletin as you fill out the blanks. But it's basically just the scriptures. And I'm going to just elaborate a little bit on each one. What is love? How would you describe it? Is love a feeling? What do you think? Okay, love can be a feeling, sure. Is love an act? Okay, love, okay, sure, love's an act. But I think some people just stop there, and they think love is a feeling, and that it is a feeling. And some people, this is the famous, we got married because we fell in love. The problem is if you get married because you fall in love, sometimes what happens when you fall out of love, and the marriage falls apart, and that's not a good thing. Sometimes we do an act of love for somebody, but other times we don't do acts of love, do we? We actually do some acts that are pretty unloving, And so maybe the acts isn't necessarily a place. I'd like to suggest to you this morning that I think while love may be a feeling and love may be an act, I'd like to suggest to you that love is a commitment. Love is a commitment. And if you're married for any length of time, you have to realize that you don't always feel loving, you don't always act loving, but you always need to be committed to love. You need to be committed. God is committed to us in love, and I'm thankful he doesn't just do it when he feels like loving me or when I'm doing an act that makes me loving of some sort. I'm glad that he's committed to loving me unconditionally. A little quiz here. Do we have anybody in our congregation who has been married 50 years or if your spouse is deceased, you were married 50 years prior to them going into glory. How many people have been married at least 50 years? One? Dad had, how long did he hit it? How long did he hit it? Thinks he hit 60 years before his wife, before Mom went home. Anybody else over 50? This morning service we had 3 or 4, and so, I mean, that's a great thing to be married for such a long time, and you don't see that today. And part of the reason is because I think we don't know how to love right. In John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35, John, who was called the beloved disciple because he and Jesus were so close and he loved Jesus so much, and John talks a lot about love, but not only in his gospel, but also in his epistle, he says that, he quotes Jesus Christ there saying, "A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another. And by this will all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." And so love is a critical thing in the church, but it's also a critical thing in the family. So this morning as we look at 1 Corinthians, I'd like you just to maybe evaluate how you are at loving, okay? How do you do as far as meeting God's standards? And if there's some questions that come along that you think, oh, this is a question I need to ask myself because I need to ask myself this question more often, maybe write it on the reverse side of your paper and just keep track of it as we look through there and say, how am I doing in this kind of thing? But I would like to suggest that love is a commitment. And one of the most dangerous phrases I hear is, I will meet them. Yeah, you see, you've heard of the same thing. I will meet them halfway. If you're going to meet them halfway, it ain't going to work. Let me just tell you. Marriage is not a 50-50 proposition. It's a 100% proposition. Because if you say, I'll meet a person, and again, this could apply to relatives, to siblings, to parents. If you say, I will meet them halfway at 50%, I will give my 50%, what happens on the day that they only give 49%? And the day that you only give 49%, there's a 2% gap there. And nobody's willing to close that 2% gap. And now you've got problems. Marriage has got to be a 100% proposition. Because there's always going to be the day when somebody gets up and I don't want to be here. And you've got to be able to stretch that gap. Again, whether it's in a marriage, whether it's in a relationship with your siblings or parents or whatever else, it's got to be a gap that can be bridged. And our society is pushing this on it. If you look at the TV movies and the TV shows today, how many do you know, what shows can you name where you have the picture of a husband and wife that are committed to each other and aren't sleeping around or having affairs or that kind of thing? Well, how many shows can you think of like that? Duck Dynasty, yes, of course. My wife runs about the 15th rerun. I say, okay, let's not watch Duck Dynasty not again. You know, she loves Duck Dynasty, yes. And believe it or not, the committed believers. You watch the prayer in the end. They'll pray in Jesus' name numerous times, and they've been on shows and they'll talk about their faith in Jesus Christ, and that's what makes a difference there. What other shows do you have? Huh? DC? These days, okay. Oh, in these days, none. Yeah, I like the detective kind of shows. That's my kind of thing. I thought White Collar. Anybody watch White Collar? Okay, one other person. See, now that's not a real popular show, I guess. But the FBI agent and his wife there are totally dedicated to one another. They're not looking at others. They're not not sleeping around or anything like that. I might be dating myself. How many people remember Heart to Heart? Oh, okay, I got to go back a little. It's not a current show, Heart to Heart. I mean, husband and wife, show kind of thing that gets together. Some comedies. I think of Home Improvement. I used to love that show. I mean, there you have a couple. And there shows some of the problems come along, in a relationship. But there was a couple that weren't looking at other things. A couple that I'm not sure I would recommend, but Archie Bunker. I mean, I guess the husband and wife were committed there, right? I mean, they didn't sleep around or anything. Or maybe everybody loves Raymond. Again, some of the situations there, I'm not sure if that's a perfect marriage, but I mean, it's pretty hard to find those these days, isn't it? And the culture wants us to understand that of all the thousands and thousands of TV shows, most of them show unfaithful couples. They show people sleeping around. They show marriage is just, is obsolete these days, and they just, you can sleep with different people. You can be sleeping with one person, then that relationship breaks up and you can go to somebody else. It's just incredible what we have on TV today, and it's permeating our minds. But it's not what the Scriptures teach. And so today, let's take a look, if you will, with me. Turn with me, if you will, to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8. And let's take a look at the passage here. And I've divided this up. There's no fancy outline today. Okay, 3 points alliterated or anything else. What I've given is basically the Scriptures themselves. And I'm going to go through and we'll talk a little bit about each one of these qualities if we could. And what I've divided them into the positive qualities, the qualities that say love should be like this, and the other, I don't call them negative qualities, but the opposite side where it says love is not like this, the picture. So you see both sides of the coin. And I'd just like to go down and talk about some of these with you and maybe ask you some questions so you can evaluate your own life and say, how does my love life, whether it's with a spouse or with your kids or with your siblings or maybe even another church member, and let's face it, some church members are not as easy to live with as some other church members, how is your love life in these situations? The first one, we come up with patience. Love is patient. How many ever lose their patience? Okay. Now, those that you didn't raise your hands, either you're very tired this morning or you're probably lying. Okay? We all lose our patience. Some of us are more apt to lose our patience. Do you lose your patience more often with those you love than with others that you don't know as well? Why? I don't know. But we're with some people more often than others, and it seems like, outside, if you talk to someone, I'll talk to everybody else, say, oh, that person's such a patient person, such a lover, and you go and talk at home, and find out patient's not quite as patient at home. Why is it that we're not as patient with those we love and those we're with all the time? Maybe it's because we're with them all the time, and it's more difficult to put up the facade. Maybe it's because we just got to know them, we get to know them better, we can let our hair down a little bit more, but it doesn't mean we should be less patient, because love is patient. It's patient as we develop this relationship. In other words, it doesn't retaliate for something. It's patient in the way it is. In 2 Peter 3:9, it says, God's love is patient, not willing that any should perish. In other words, if God wasn't patient, we'd all be headed to hell probably, by now. But even as I was talking with a couple this morning, you're trying to witness to their father and so forth, to bring him to Christ, and God's patient. Sometimes he allows us to hold on longer, and he doesn't end the world. It doesn't bring on Armageddon and all the bad stuff that's in the future, because he's just waiting for people to come to know him, because he's patient. His love is patient. What if God was as patient with you as you are with your spouse? We all might want to turn that paper over and write that question down, huh? A good question? What if God was as patient with you as you are with your spouse? We might all be in trouble. Who needs it? Husbands, wives, parents, members of the church. Love is patient. Love is kind. Verse 4, the second part of it. MacArthur says, kind means to be useful, serving, and gracious. It's active goodwill. Kindness seeks the welfare of the one who's loved. Trying to be nice to them, trying to do things for them. In Matthew 11:30, it's Jesus Christ says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Do you remember that passage? That word easy is the same exact word as used here for kind. Love is easy. It's not hard to be kind. It's able to be kind, and it's not hard work. It's something that it's making life easier for the other person. That's what kindness is. It rejoices with the truth. And this is down in chapter 6, the second part of verse 6. Rejoices with the truth. One of the biggest complaints I hear in marriage when I'm counseling with people, it's, I don't trust them anymore. Why don't we trust them anymore? And I get this all the time, especially in the military, where you're dealing a lot of time with unbelievers who, are just coming for counseling. And, it's because I think relates to this a little bit. We don't rejoice with the truth. When things go wrong, what do? we try to hide it a little bit, just like, I mean, we're all like kids in a certain sense. You do something wrong, what do you try to do? Try to cover it over. You don't want anybody to know about it, But in a family relationship, what we do is we cover it over, and then we cover it over a second time, and then something else happens, we cover that over. And I see Lisa does a lot of premarital counseling or marital counseling with her husband, shaking her head, and that's true, right? We cover it over, and then all of a sudden, something comes up we're not willing to cover it over. And what happens? Boom, all of a sudden the truth comes out. And now we've got all this baggage that has gone along, these untruths and hiding and deceit. And then what happens? Well, now we can't trust the person. But marriage, love, rejoices in the truth. It's truthful. It's honest. Now, there are some things that you should lie about in a marriage. If your wife asks you, how do you like her new earrings? The answer is, they're beautiful. But all kidding aside, you need to be truthful. And it rejoices in the truth. And love does that. We don't try to cover up our wrongs. It bears all things in verse 7. Bears all things. Bear means to cover, to support, to protect. It bears up other things. Things that come that are problems, it protects from exposure, ridicule, and harm, John MacArthur says. It's a protective thing. That what means bears all things. It supports it. I think bears all things also to me means that it says, I'm forbearing in this, It's not one more time and I'm through, I'm done. I don't think that's love, How many times do we forgive is to say, was Jesus Christ answer to Peter? How many times? That's 490 times, right? So 490, if you get 491, it's done. I don't think that's what God meant, Jesus meant there. I think he meant just consistent forgiveness. It bears with things, Love will take it. And that's hard sometimes, especially if it happens over a long time. But it bears all things. It protects others. There's a story during Oliver Cromwell's reign as Lord Protector of England. A young soldier was sentenced to die. And the girl whom he was engaged pleaded with Cromwell to spare the life of her beloved and in some way forgive him, and Cromwell was unwilling to pardon the man. He was said to be executed when the curfew bell sounded. But when the sexton started pulling the bell during curfew, it wouldn't ring. And he continued to pull it, and it didn't ring. Finally, he climbed up to find out what had happened, what was wrong, and here the man's fiancée had wrapped herself around the clap of the bell so it would not ring. And bruised and battered, she would not leave go because she didn't want her fiancé to be executed. The man brought her down and presented her to Cromwell. And as he saw her, and she explained what she had done, he commuted the sentence of the soldier. It bears all things. It's willing to protect the other person. Verse 7, it believes all things. Now, I don't think this is naive. I don't think it means that we should be naive. But I think it means we should give the benefit of the doubt. The NIV says, love always trusts. It doesn't mean we should be gullible. But then again, I believe it does mean love should not be suspicious. Where were you for the last 10 minutes? How come you were late tonight? I mean, that goes back to being truthful. We need to encourage that trust and respect. I don't think there's any time that my wife hardly doesn't know where I'm at, in some sense or another. Even if it's over at Fort Dix, she knows where I'm at. And it's not because I got to keep an account, but there should be a place where we are where we're ashamed to be someplace. It's not accountability as much as it is being trustworthy and helping us to believe all things, to believe in our spouse. What happens when they cause us not to believe? Well, then we need to, kind of look at things in the whole. But we still need to be willing to trust and be willing to believe. Verse 7, next, it talks about hopes all things. I put down never loses hope or gives up. hope is a strange thing. And if you're in a marriage that is in difficult straits right now, if you have a friend and you say, well, what's the use of listening? I'm not married. I'm probably never going to get married. Well, I can guarantee you at work you're going to have some friend that's going to be married that's going to say, oh, I wish I could, have somebody give me some advice. Well, look at this passage and be ready to give some advice because there's plenty of good advice here. Hope's all things. What's the chance of your marriage succeeding? I can't tell you the chance. A lot of it depends on you, though. And I've seen some pretty miraculous situations that I almost never am willing to say there is no hope. The only no hope I've seen is maybe when both spouses are remarried to someone else. Then maybe there's no hope. But, there's always that hope. The hope that Jesus Christ gives us is a different kind of hope in the world. It's not a hope like, I hope I win the lottery, or I hope, I get a new house, or I hope I get a raise at work. But it's a hope that is based in Jesus Christ and the fact that Jesus Christ can change lives. He can change you. He can change your spouse. He can change that sibling. He can change that work situation. And I don't want this on anybody, but if you're sometime in a situation, say this work's never going to change, that boss or something. I mean, he could be dead tomorrow of a heart attack. I'm not wishing that on him, but I'm just saying we sometimes don't understand that and think out of the box. We see things so limited. But God can change things. Never give up hope in your relationship. Understand that God is faithful, just as we've been singing about, and that we need to be hopeful in what's happening. There was a dog that was once, its master was killed while he was away. And the man traveled frequently, but always came back to the airport. And the employees and others fed the dog. Here, this dog for 5 years went to the same exact spot in the airport to wait for the owner. He would not give up hope that someday they'll be reunited. Now, unfortunately, the owner had died, and that hope would not be fulfilled for that dog. But that is different than our hope, because we have a God who can change things around. Don't give up hope. And then lastly, on the positive side here, the things that love is like, it endures all things. Well, we can endure a lot, can't we? Now, I'm not saying we should endure physical abuse if you're being abused physically. You need to protect yourself. You need to protect your family. But you still need to endure. Endurance means perseverance, sticking with it. Before you say it isn't fair. Life is not always fair. And sometimes we are victims of our own decisions. If you're a young person, you're going to get married, I encourage you, do not get married without premarital counseling. We require 6 sessions, and usually if best it's 6 months, 6 months, a month apart. Do homework, read books, discuss things, come back and let us discuss with you. And we've had a couple of people that have not gotten married, not because we recommended they don't, but as they went through the counseling, they realized this isn't going to work out. One of my heartbreakers is one where it didn't work out, and they went all along and didn't get marriage counseling and married somebody else, and eventually got a divorce. But you need to have that premarital counseling. You need to be able to look back so you can endure all things, so you can get all the right sheet of music. And I know Pastor and Lisa do counseling, premarital counseling. It's so important because enduring all things means to be steadfast. It's actually a military term used of holding a position. To endure when the attacks come, whether from Satan, whether someone else that's trying to hone in on your spouse or your family or trying to create problems and difficulties. It's a matter of staying with it and enduring and persevering through the problems and fending off all assaults. As we look at the other side of the equation here, there's a number of things in this passage that talks about things that marriage is not like. If you look over here, the first thing that he lists is in verse 4, love is not jealous. I think of this in 2 ways. One, it's not jealous of other people. Boy, that person's spouse is really nice. Anybody's other spouse is going to look nice if you don't have to live with them 24/7. It's amazing what other people can look like when you don't know them really super well. And for those of us who have been married for a long time, we know our spouses for a long time. And, we're not perfect. There's probably some of you who think, boy, if I was married to Pastor Taylor or Pastor Scott, everything would be great. Don't talk to our wives, please. We have our bad days, you know. Maybe we have our bad weeks sometimes. Maybe our bad months. It's not always easy. Don't be jealous of somebody else and their spouse and how things are going with them. Concentrate on your own. And I think jealous is also not being jealous of the other person, you know. Well, boy, how come they get so many compliments, you know? And it's so tough, you know. Well, my spouse gets accolades going to work, and they get promotions, and everyone's telling them to do a great job, and I'm a stay-at-home mom, and nobody ever tells me I'm doing a good job, you know. We need to be sensitive to that kind of thing. I think of myself in the military, you know. It used to be years ago, you know, back in the Vietnam era, you didn't want to wear your uniform off post. I mean, it was bad. I mean, you get spit on and everything else. Today, the climate's changed a little bit more. And I'll go to if I happen to go to a mall on my way home, or I'm traveling like I was last week in an airport on Sunday, which is why I missed. I was coming back from Wisconsin, where it was minus 18 degrees, so very cold. I think we have it bad here, but. You know, people stop you sometimes and say, I was traveling in civilian clothes, but if you're in the airport, they might stop and say, thank you for your service, you know. And that's a great compliment. But you know what, when Lois walks to the airport, or when she walks to the mall, nobody ever stops and says, thank you for your service to her, even though she's sacrificed equally as much, if not more. And I did better my second tour, I think, than I did my first tour. Hopefully I get better as age goes on. But we need to recognize that we're a partnership. And, you know, it can't be that we're jealous of somebody else, and she can't be jealous of me. In fact, the fact that she supports me so much, I mean, she is excited when things go well in our life. And that's a positive thing. But you have to work at that. You can't be jealous of your spouse or jealous of other people. I think of Jonathan's love for David, you know. Even though Jonathan was going to be king, Jonathan knew that David was going to be king, even though Jonathan was the king's son, he still loved David and said, I will do whatever it takes to help you succeed. That's true love, not looking out for yourself. Love does not brag. I'm good looking. I could have done a lot better than you, or something. I mean, it doesn't brag about ourselves. We were at Lois and I were at a Pastor and Wives retreat this last week, and the farmer, Dr. Farmer, was telling a story there. He said there was a couple that was sitting there at a table at some sort of a place, I guess a party or something, where they're having a dance, and there was this guy out there that was just kind of took the whole floor up and was just, you know, dancing away, and, you know, he's doing all kinds of gyrations and flips and, you know, on his head going around, and just having a wild time out there. And he was really a great dancer. And the wife leaned over to the husband and says, you know, he asked me to marry him 15 years ago, and I turned him down flat. And the husband looked at him for a while and studied and said, looks like he's still celebrating. Probably should have answered that question differently. But, you know, love doesn't brag, you know. I'm this much, I'm that much. And it kind of leads into the other one, is not arrogant, you know. It's kind of like bragging with an attitude, you know. Being arrogant or bragging about how we are. Our status as a lover is a humble status. And when we try to start thinking more of ourselves than the other person, thinking we're pretty good, then it's hard to be loving to other people. I mean, it's hard to live with an arrogant person, isn't it? Hard to be. Have you ever had an arrogant boss, you know? Know somebody outside that's just an arrogant person? Boy, it's hard to love them, isn't it? But love is not arrogant. William Carey translated the Bible into like 34 different languages and dialects, parts of it and so forth. He was a missionary to India, actually a Baptist missionary, one of the four founders of missions, a tremendous missionary. But he started out as a cobbler. And he was at a party or an occasion in India one night, some sort of a recognition ceremony or whatever, and someone they'd like to put him down for his former occupation. He says, someone walked him and said, Dr. Carey, I understand you used to be a shoemaker, which is what cobbler did. He says, no, I wasn't never a shoemaker. I was only a shoe repairman. You know, no arrogance in what he had. And for us as Christians to be able to learn to be humble, whether it's in our relationships with others of the church, whether it's in our relationships at home, to be humble and to not be arrogant or braggadocious is so important. It does not, in verse 5, act unbecomingly, not careless. You know, we all know how we should act. This is good manners. You know, to be act properly as a spouse or as a lover. I think it means not be unfaithful, not be flirtatious, not going to inappropriate places. A girl once came to me over in the Army and said, "Boy, how come it's all guys are bums? I can't find any guy that I would ever want to, you know, every time I talk to them, they're all lousy." And I said, "Well, who are you talking about? Where do you go?" And she told me how she would go to the bars on Friday and Saturday night, you know. And I said, "Well, do you think maybe you should try someplace else, like maybe church on a Sunday morning instead of a bar on Friday night?" Now, I'm not saying everybody that's in a church on a Friday morning or on a Sunday morning is necessarily perfect, but I'm saying, you know, we need to go to the places and act becomingly, not act unbecomingly, places that are not where we should be. It does not seek its own. This is me first attitude. So easy to be selfish, isn't it? Look for what I get out of this. You know, I'm not getting this. I'm not getting the love I deserve. I'm not getting the support I deserve. Me, 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 me. And yeah, we do need to have that, but you know, and if I was talking to your spouse, I'd tell them the same thing, and maybe they need to hear the same thing, but probably not from you. You know? What is it about us? True love puts the other person first. It doesn't seek themselves. It's selflessness, not selfishness. Husbands, we're the head of the house. We teach that. And wives, we teach them to respect their husbands, you know. And, you know, but I think that's if the husband's doing what he should, it's a great deal for our wives. Because husbands, when it means head of the house, doesn't mean you make all the rules. It means you're responsible for what goes on there. When things go wrong, God holds you accountable. We need to be the fathers and the husbands that we're supposed to be before God. We need to be emulating these qualities. And I'll tell you, I've never heard a woman come in and say, "My husband emulates all these qualities that are in this thing, and I don't want him to be head of our house." You know? If we emulate these qualities, it works. And sometimes, yeah, there is this time when we have to take off our hats and say, you know, I have to be the head of the house. Someone's got to make a decision here, and this is the way I think we need to go. And we need to be held accountable before God before that. But on most things, it should be, you know, what do you want, dear? You know, what's best? And that's what should go. Because we love our wives. It's not me first, it's you first. And if we do that, we'll be acting so much better. One man had been married, I think it was if I remember correctly, it was like 80 or 90 years. Like the longest one that had been married was over in England, I think. This was a few years back. They were interviewing him. And they said to him, you know, what is the secret to your success as a husband? 80 or 90 years, whatever it was. This is incredible. He was like 110 years old. And he said, well, 2 words. He said, yeah, you heard it, wasn't it? Yes, dear. Yes, dear. You know, that's what love says. Love says the other person's first. There's a plain tombstone in the courtyard at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. It reads this way: "Sacred to the memory of General Charles George Gordon, who at all times and in everywhere gave his strength to the weak, his substance to the poor, his sympathy to the suffering, and his heart to God." Seek others first. That's what love's all about. It's not provoked. How easily do you get provoked at home? Do you get more provoked with your spouse or with someone that's close to you than you do with other people? Well, that goes back to the patience, doesn't it? It seems like it's so easy to get provoked. But love doesn't get provoked. Love says, yes, dear, I'll do my best. What can I get for you? And I'll tell you what, when you're sitting on the couch after a long day of work and putting your feet up saying, finally I can sit down and watch something, and your spouse needs something, would you get me the newspaper? Would you get me a cup of coffee? It's not the time you're thinking, easily provoked. You're thinking, I wish you could get that for me. But sometimes we get provoked, don't we? We get angry because we're looking at ourselves. We're not putting someone else ahead of us. Anger is not the part of a loving relationship. And sometimes it happens in the church, right? Somebody ticks you off. You get mad, and then you wind up on some of the other things failing because then you get arrogant. I deserve better respect than that. And, you know, that person should be doing this for me. And it just snowballs. because we don't listen to what the Lord says here, is not provoked true love. True love does not track wrongs suffered. It kind of relates to one of the ones we mentioned earlier. It's an accounting term. It doesn't keep track of what we do wrong. It's not like, like you said, where, this is going wrong, and now I'm going to remember every single thing you did over the last 5 years, and I can tell you the dates and times too, It doesn't keep track of those kind of things. It lets it go away. It allows for a fresh start. Now, I admit, when we keep on losing it and messing it up so many times, it's hard to continue not keeping track, and yet that's what love is really about. This illustration was given to me when I first became pastor, and it relates to that, but it also relates, I think, equally to marriage. It was the idea of when you become a pastor, you get a certain number of marbles in your pocket. Or when you get married, you get a certain number of marbles, to start off with. When you remember your wife's birthday with a special gift she really wanted, you get a couple of extra marbles, maybe 3 or 4 marbles. When you take her out to that nice restaurant that she wanted for anniversary, you get maybe 4 or 5 more. When you bring home flowers unexpectedly, well, I haven't got those marbles for a long while, have I? You get a few more marbles. Maybe now you start out with 25, now you're up to 30 or 40, marbles. And then you wind up forgetting your 6th anniversary. How many marbles do you think you lose on that one? All of them. Not quite, but a lot more than you got when you remembered the previous one. Okay? So the idea was told me as a pastor, you always want to have marbles in your pocket, When you do a funeral or when you marry somebody, you get some marbles, but you don't want to lose all your marbles, And the same thing is true in marriage. You don't want to lose all your marbles. So you need to continually have marbles. And you can't forget too many things. And what happens when you have 4 marbles left and now you do something really stupid like yelling at your wife? You're down to, you lose 10 marbles, you're down to -6 now. Now what do? Now you're digging yourself out of a hole. And I'll tell you, the flowers won't get you 3 marbles anymore. They might get you half a marble if you're lucky at that point. So as we look at this, does not track wrongs suffered. Wrongs lose marbles. Doing positive things gains marbles, but we should want to do that. Does not rejoice in unrighteousness. This is a hard one, If you're keeping track of wrongs, then sometimes you're just you're just waiting for the next shoe to drop. And I've talked to people, they've had so many problems in their marriage and relationship that they're just looking. Well, why don't you trust them? Give them the benefit of the doubt. No, I'm not going to benefit of the doubt. You watch. By tomorrow, they will do, and they've got it down. They're going to get angry, or they're going to smoke a cigarette if they promise they're not going to do that, or they're going to stay late at work. They're not going to be home in time for supper. And they're just waiting for the next thing to happen so they can blame them for doing something more wrong. You know what? And a lot of times they expect it and they want it because then they can rejoice in the fact that they failed. And now they've got more ammunition for themselves to feel unloving and be unloving. But it does not only not track wrong suffered, but it does not rejoice in unrighteousness. We're not waiting for them to fall again. True love wants them to really succeed. I hope they'll be right this time. I'm not sure they will. I have my doubts. It's failed before, but I want them to succeed. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. I want this relationship to work. And then lastly, does not fail. True love never fails. True love is supernaturally grounded in God's love. God's love never fails. It never fails. I close with 3 Old Testament characters briefly. Abraham. Abraham was known as a man of faith. It says that faith was counted for righteousness. It wasn't because of what he did, but it was his faith that evidenced his righteousness in his life. And Abraham was known as a man of faith. There's also Joseph, if you remember. Joseph was one of those men who, if you talk about a love relationship, he was sold into slavery by his brothers. I hope none of you have ever done that. He wound up going, he goes down into slavery to his brothers, and with his brothers send him off. He goes down into slavery, gets picked up as a slave, winds up to the top of the man's house and as far as overseeing everything, and then he's a good-looking guy, and the wife wants to sleep with him, and he says, I won't. He runs off, leaves his robe, and she accuses him of rape, and lo and behold, here he is. He's gone from slavery up to the top of the thing. Now he winds up in prison. He's trustworthy. He winds up being the head prisoner. Now there's a nice title, huh? Head prisoner in Egypt. But he's trusted there. And then he tells a few dreams, gets them right, and those guys go off to Pharaoh and forget him there. Finally, he comes up and Pharaoh brings him up, and he winds up being in charge of the kingdom. But when he dies, he tells his brothers, when you leave this place and go back to Israel, he still had that hope that they go. So when you go back, take my bones with me and bury me next to my father. He still, all through his life, so many bad circumstances, and then he always had hope. He was known as that person of hope, always looking to the future and to the next thing that God was going to do in his life in spite of his circumstances. And then there was Ruth. Ruth, if you remember, she was a Moabite, and Moabites were not supposed to be coming to Israel's country and to be part of their kingdom or anything for up to 10 generations because of what they had done. And yet she wound up marrying an Israelite, and her husband dies. And then her mother-in-law goes back to Bethlehem, and will Ruth go with her or not? Ruth says, where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Where you die, I will die. Or, your God will be my God. And she loves her tremendously. And she goes back, and then she winds up falling in love and with Boaz, and Boaz, the farmer, the landowner, falls in love with her, and they have a beautiful love story. And then they have a child who eventually, their descendants become King David, king of all of Israel. A tremendous, a beautiful love story in 4 chapters. And I ask you, which would you rather be? Abraham, the man of faith, Joseph, the man of hope, or Ruth, the lover? I don't know, they were all great characters. But in this particular chapter, Paul ends it with, these 3 still abide: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. These are instructions. Regardless of what your relationship is with your spouse, regardless of how you're doing at work, or how you have had existence with maybe past churches or someone at the church, or maybe your siblings, take these questions about love and say, am I really fulfilling God's desire in my life to be the lover that God wants me to be? Because he said, we love him because he first loved us. Dear Lord, we thank you for your love for us. We ask that you might help us to be lovers of others, that you might help us in spite of difficult circumstances, because some people are very difficult to love. And sometimes we are caught in circumstances, or we're married to someone that is just not as easy to love, or things are going wrong, and whether it's with our spouse or with our children or with our siblings. And we just ask you might help us to be the lover that we need to be according to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. That you'll help us to put these characteristics in our life regardless of whom we talk to. And that we would demonstrate your love to an unloving world who does not know your love for them. May we show that you so loved the world that you gave your only begotten Son. And may they see that through us. In Jesus' name, amen.
One of the Lord Jesus' final commands before he left this earth, he told his disciples to love one another. How? As I have loved you. That's a real tall task for all of us as we leave this place, but our need is to trust and to lean on God's strength to help us love as he wants us to love. Let's stand and sing this song, which will remind us of that truth.